I was 3 weeks into building my sunroom addition when Patricia Vanderhoff knocked on my door with that smile that told me I was about to have a very bad day. My name is Xavier Hughes, and I had lived in the Meadowbrook Springs development in Gilbert, Arizona, for 6 years without incident. I kept my lawn green, my house painted, and my nose out of other people's business. The HOA had always been tolerable, if a bit nitpicky about mailbox colors and Christmas decoration timelines. But when I decided to add a 12 by 16-foot sunroom to the back of my house, everything changed. I had done everything right. I pulled the permits from the town of Gilbert Building Department. I hired a licensed contractor. I even submitted my plans to the HOA Architectural Committee 2 months before breaking ground, and after one revision to match the stucco texture to my existing house, they approved it in writing. I had that approval letter tucked away in a folder with all my other paperwork. So when Patricia showed up that Tuesday afternoon in October, I genuinely thought she was just being neighborly. Maybe she had baked cookies. Maybe she wanted to discuss the upcoming HOA meeting about the pool resurfacing project. "Xavier," she said, her voice syrupy sweet but with an edge that could cut glass. "I need to talk to you about your little construction project." I wiped the sweat from my forehead. I had been helping my contractor, Miguel, install the French doors that would lead from my living room into the new sunroom. "Sure, Patricia, what about it?" "Well, it has come to my attention that your addition extends beyond the approved setback line." I frowned. "No, it does not. I have the survey right here, and the architectural committee approved the exact placement." Patricia pursed her lips. She was 52, impeccably dressed even on a Tuesday afternoon, with highlighted blonde hair that looked like it cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She had been on the HOA board for 8 years and president for the last 3. "I think you will find that there are discrepancies. The board has decided to report this to the building department for inspection." My stomach dropped. "You are going to call the building department on a project they already permitted and you already approved?" "We have a responsibility to ensure all construction in Meadowbrook Springs meets our standards," she said primly. "I am sure if everything is up to code, you will have nothing to worry about." She walked away before I could respond, her heels clicking on my driveway. Miguel came to the door behind me. "What was that about?" "I think the HOA is about to make my life hell," I said. I was right. 3 days later, a building inspector named Tom Bradshaw showed up at my house at 8 in the morning. He was in his late 40s, weathered by the Arizona sun, with a no-nonsense attitude and a clipboard that had seen better days. "Got a complaint about this addition," he said, walking around to the back of my house. "HOA called it in, said you were building without permits." "I have all my permits," I said, following him. "I can show you right now. Let me take a look first." I watched as Tom examined the foundation, the framing, the setbacks from the property line. He pulled out a measuring tape and checked distances. He looked at the electrical work Miguel had roughed in. He climbed a ladder to check the roof tie-ins. After 45 minutes, he climbed down and nodded. "Everything looks good here. You have got your permits posted, your contractor is licensed, and you are well within your setbacks." "Who did you say called this in?" "Patricia Vanderhoff, the HOA president." Tom made a note on his clipboard. "Well, she wasted everybody's time. There is nothing wrong here. You are good to continue." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. So that is it. The HOA cannot stop me. Not unless they want to take you to civil court, and good luck to them since they already approved it. He paused, looking at me thoughtfully. "You know, if you want to file a complaint against them for harassment, you would have grounds." "I just want to finish my sunroom in peace," I said. Tom nodded, but then he looked past my fence toward the community clubhouse that sat at the end of my street. "That the HOA clubhouse?" "Yeah, why? When was that built?" "I think about 10 years ago, before I moved in." Tom was quiet for a moment, then shook his head. "Probably nothing. Anyway, you are all clear here. Have a good one." He left, and I thought that was the end of it. I called Patricia immediately to let her know the building department had cleared my addition, and I would be continuing construction. She hung up on me. 2 weeks later, I received a certified letter from the HOA. It informed me that despite the building department's approval, the architectural committee had decided my sunroom violated the community covenants, conditions, and restrictions, specifically the section about maintaining neighborhood aesthetics. They were fining me $50 per day until I removed the addition. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the letter in disbelief. Miguel had already finished the walls and roof. We were days away from final electrical and HVAC. I had spent nearly $20,000. That evening, I drove to my lawyer's office. Janet Morrison had handled my house closing when I bought the place, and I trusted her. She was in her 60s, sharp as a tack, with silver hair and reading glasses that hung on a chain around her neck. "They cannot do this, right?" I asked, sliding the letter across her desk. Janet read it carefully, her expression darkening. "Do you have the approval letter from the architectural committee?" "Yes, right here." I pulled it from my folder. She reviewed everything: my permits, my survey, my approval letter, and the HOA's CC and Artiques. After 20 minutes, she looked up. "They are completely in the wrong. They approved your addition in writing. You followed all the proper procedures. This is harassment, and depending on how far they take it, it might even be actionable." "So what do I do?" "First, you respond in writing, citing their approval and your compliance with all regulations. You refuse to pay the fines. Then we wait and see what they do. If they try to file a lien or take legal action, we will countersue for harassment, legal fees, and emotional distress." I left her office feeling slightly better but still angry. Why was Patricia doing this? I had never had any issues with her before. My house was immaculate. I paid my HOA dues on time every month. I volunteered for community events. The next HOA board meeting was the following Thursday. I made sure to attend. The meeting was held in the clubhouse, a large stucco building with a community room, a small gym, and bathrooms. About 20 homeowners attended, most of them there to hear about the pool resurfacing project that had been delayed due to contractor issues. Patricia ran the meeting like a military operation. Treasurer's report, landscaping report, pool report. Finally, under new business, she brought up my addition. "We have an ongoing issue with a homeowner who has constructed an addition without proper HOA approval," she announced. I stood up. "That is a lie." The room went silent. Patricia's face flushed red. "Excuse me." "That is a lie," I repeated calmly. "I submitted my plans to the architectural committee. They approved them in writing, and I have that approval letter. I also have all my town permits, and the building inspector came out and cleared everything. You are making up violations that do not exist." Another board member, a man named Richard Clemens, spoke up. "Patricia, did the architectural committee approve his plans?" Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "There were errors in the approval process. The committee did not have all the information." "What information?" I demanded. "I gave you everything. Survey, floor plans, elevation drawings, material samples. You approved it. The setbacks were incorrect," Patricia insisted. "The building inspector measured the setbacks himself. They are correct." The room erupted in murmurs. I could see other homeowners looking at Patricia with suspicion. Richard Clemens looked particularly uncomfortable. An older woman in the back raised her hand. Her name was Dorothy Chen, and she had lived in Meadowbrook Springs since the development was built. Patricia, why are you doing this? If the young man got approval and permits, what is the problem? Patricia's jaw tightened. The problem is that we have standards in this community, and we cannot allow homeowners to just build whatever they want. But he did not build whatever he wanted, Dorothy said. He followed the rules. The meeting devolved into chaos. Homeowners were arguing with each other, some supporting Patricia, some supporting me. Finally, Patricia gavelled the meeting to order and moved on to other business, but the damage was done. People were questioning her authority. After the meeting, Richard Clemens pulled me aside. Look, I am sorry about this. Between you and me, Patricia has been on a power trip lately. She shot down 3 different renovation requests this year for reasons that made no sense. But she runs the board with an iron fist, and the rest of us just try to keep the peace. So what do? I asked. Keep building. You are in the right, and if she tries to fine you, fight it. She is betting that you will give in rather than spend money on lawyers. She is betting wrong, I said. Over the next week, Miguel and I finished the sunroom. It was beautiful, 16 feet of windows looking out over my small backyard, with tile flooring and recessed lighting. The French doors from my living room opened perfectly. I had already ordered furniture for it. Then I got another letter. The HOA was placing a lien on my property for unpaid fines totaling $700, 14 days at $50 per day. I called Janet Morrison immediately. She filed a lawsuit against the HOA the next day, seeking removal of the lien, harassment damages, and attorney's fees. The lawsuit changed everything. Within a week, I received a call from Richard Clemens. He sounded stressed. Xavier, we need to talk. The board met in emergency session last night. Patricia wants to fight your lawsuit, but our insurance company is refusing to cover it because she acted outside the scope of the CC and Artiques. We are looking at paying legal fees out of the reserve fund. That is not my problem, Richard. I know. But here is the thing. 3 other board members, including me, are ready to vote her out as president. We think she has been abusing her authority for years. We want to settle with you, remove the lien, apologize, and move on, but we need a little time to get the votes together. I considered this. How much time? 2 weeks. The next regular board meeting? Fine. But if Patricia pulls anything else in the meantime, all bets are off. Patricia did not pull anything else, but she did not go quietly either. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she was calling homeowners, trying to rally support, claiming I was the one harassing her, that I was trying to destroy property values with my unapproved addition. Most people did not buy it. Too many of them had seen my approval letter, which I had started bringing to every conversation about the issue. The day before the board meeting, something unexpected happened. Tom Bradshaw, the building inspector, showed up at my door again. Hey, Xavier, he said. You got a minute? Sure, come on in. We sat in my new sunroom. Tom looked around appreciatively. This came out nice. Your contractor does good work. Thanks. What brings you by? Tom looked uncomfortable. So, after I inspected your place and that HOA lady wasted my time, something was bugging me. The way she was so insistent that you were in violation, and then that clubhouse down the street, it just did not sit right. Okay. So I went back to the office and pulled the records on the clubhouse, and there are some problems. I leaned forward. What kind of problems? The kind where the final inspection was never completed. The building was constructed in 2014, and they got rough inspections for electrical, plumbing, and framing. But there is no final inspection on record, which means the building was never officially approved for occupancy. My eyes widened. You are kidding. I am not. And that made me curious, so I drove by yesterday and took a closer look. Just from the outside, I could see some issues. The emergency exit signs were not illuminated. There were cracks in the foundation that looked concerning. And the handicap ramp was not up to code, wrong slope. So what does that mean? Tom rubbed his face. It means I need to do a full inspection, and I wanted to give you a heads up because this is going to blow up in your HOA's face. If the violations are as bad as I think they are, I am going to have to condemn the building. I sat back, stunned. When are you going to inspect it? Tomorrow morning. I already notified your HOA board. They were not happy. The next morning, I watched from my driveway as Tom Bradshaw pulled up to the clubhouse. Patricia was already there, along with Richard Clemens and 2 other board members. Even from a distance, I could see Patricia gesturing angrily. Tom disappeared inside the clubhouse. 30 minutes passed. Then 45. Other homeowners started to gather, curious about what was happening. Dorothy Chen came and stood next to me. "What is going on?" she asked. "Building inspection," I said. "For what?" "The clubhouse." Dorothy's eyes widened. "Oh my." When Tom finally emerged, he was shaking his head. He spoke to Patricia and the board members for several minutes. I could not hear what was being said, but Patricia's face went from angry to pale to red again. She started yelling. Tom remained calm, pulling something from his clipboard and handing it to her. Then he walked over to his truck, pulled out a large red sign and posted it on the clubhouse door. Even from my driveway, I could read it. "Condemned, do not enter." The neighborhood erupted. Homeowners rushed toward the clubhouse, demanding answers. Tom spent 20 minutes explaining the situation to the growing crowd while Patricia stood off to the side, her arms crossed, her face a mask of fury. Finally, Tom got in his truck and drove away. As he passed my house, he gave me a small wave. The board meeting that night was the most well-attended HOA meeting in Meadowbrook Springs history. Every seat in the clubhouse was filled. Wait, no. The meeting was moved to the community pool area because the clubhouse was condemned. Folding chairs were set up on the pool deck, and at least 75 homeowners showed up. Patricia tried to call the meeting to order, but she was immediately shouted down. Why was the clubhouse never properly inspected? Someone yelled. How much is it going to cost to fix? Another person demanded, "Did you know about this?" Patricia banged her gavel uselessly. Finally, Richard Clemens stood up and took the microphone from her. "Everyone, please let us go through this systematically," he said. This morning, the Town of Gilbert Building Department conducted an inspection of our clubhouse. The inspector found multiple code violations and determined that the building was never granted final occupancy approval when it was constructed in 2014. "Why not?" Dorothy Chen called out. Richard looked at Patricia, who refused to meet his eyes. "We are still determining that. The board that oversaw the construction is mostly no longer in office. Patricia is the only current board member who was serving back then." All eyes turned to Patricia. "I was just the treasurer," she said defensively. "I was not involved in the construction decisions." "But you would have seen the invoices," Richard said. "Did we pay for a final inspection?" Patricia's silence spoke volumes. "What were the violations?" someone else asked. Richard consulted a paper. Electrical code violations. The emergency lighting system was never properly installed. Plumbing issues. Several fixtures were not up to code. Structural concerns. There is foundation settling that needs to be evaluated by an engineer. The handicap ramp is not ADA compliant, and several fire safety issues, including blocked emergency exits and missing fire extinguishers. The crowd exploded with anger and questions. It took 10 minutes to restore order. An older man I recognized as Robert Fitzgerald, a retired contractor, stood up. How much is this going to cost to fix? We do not know yet, Richard admitted. We need to get bids, but realistically, we are probably looking at $50,000 to $75,000, possibly more. Gasps echoed across the pool deck. We do not have that in the reserve fund, the treasurer, a woman named Susan Park, said quietly. We have $32,000 in reserves. So what does that mean? Dorothy asked. It means a special assessment, Richard said. Every homeowner in Meadowbrook Springs is going to have to pay their share. The meeting descended into chaos again. People were yelling, some at the board, some at Patricia specifically. Finally, Robert Fitzgerald raised his hand and spoke loudly enough to be heard over the din. I move that we remove Patricia Vanderhoff as president of the board, effective immediately. I second, Dorothy Chen called out. A vote was held. It was not even close. 68 homeowners voted to remove Patricia. 7 voted against. Patricia stormed off the pool deck and disappeared into the night. Richard was elected as the new president. His first act was to formally apologize to me in front of everyone and announce that the lien on my property would be removed immediately. His second act was to form an investigation committee to look into the clubhouse construction and determine what had happened. Over the next 2 weeks, the truth came out. In 2014, the HOA board had hired a contractor to build the clubhouse. The contractor, a man named Dennis Shaw, had been the lowest bidder by a significant margin. He had pulled the permits and started construction, but halfway through the project, his business ran into financial trouble. He cut corners to save money. He used unlicensed subcontractors for the electrical and plumbing work. He never called for the final inspection because he knew the building would not pass. Patricia, as treasurer at the time, had signed off on the final payment to Dennis Shaw, even though the work was not complete. When questioned by the investigation committee, she claimed she had not known the final inspection had not been done, that she had trusted the contractor and the board president at the time, a man named Xavier Hughes, who had since moved to Florida. But the committee also found emails. Patricia had been warned by another board member that the clubhouse might not be up to code. She had dismissed the concerns and pushed to open the building anyway. She wanted to have a grand opening party before the holidays in 2014, and she had not wanted to delay. The community was outraged. Several homeowners called for legal action against Patricia. Janet Morrison, my lawyer, explained that it was complicated. Patricia could potentially be sued by the HOA for breach of fiduciary duty, but proving damages that were specifically her fault, as opposed to the entire board's fault, would be difficult. Then things took a darker turn. The investigation committee discovered that the contractor, Dennis Shaw, had been unlicensed at the time he built the clubhouse. He had used a fake license number on the permit application. That was fraud. Moreover, Patricia had received a kickback from Dennis Shaw. The committee found a check made out to Patricia for $5,000, deposited 2 weeks after the final payment to Shaw. Patricia claimed it was a loan repayment for money she had lent Shaw years earlier, but she could not provide any documentation of the original loan. This was when the police got involved. Detective Maria Sanchez from the Gilbert Police Department came to interview several board members, including me, since I had been one of the people who had exposed the clubhouse issues. I told her everything I knew, which was not much beyond the timeline of events. Patricia was arrested on November 15th. The charges were fraud and embezzlement. The embezzlement charge stemmed from additional irregularities the investigation committee had found. Over the past 3 years, Patricia had approved multiple payments to vendors for work that was either never done or was significantly overcharged. She had been receiving kickbacks on those payments as well. In total, She had stolen nearly $18,000 from the HOA. The neighborhood was in shock. Patricia had always presented herself as the guardian of Meadowbrook Springs, the person who kept property values high and standards intact. Now she was being led away in handcuffs. The special assessment to fix the clubhouse ended up being $4,200 per household. It hurt, but most people paid it without too much complaint. We all wanted a functioning clubhouse, and we understood that the previous board's mistakes were now our collective responsibility. The repairs took 4 months. The HOA hired a reputable contractor who pulled everything up to code. New electrical, new plumbing, foundation repair, proper ADA-compliant ramps, fire safety systems, everything. The building inspector, Tom Bradshaw, did 3 separate inspections during the process, and finally, in March, granted the certificate of occupancy that should have been issued back in 2014. Patricia pleaded guilty to fraud and embezzlement in January. She was sentenced to 18 months in county jail and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. Her husband, a quiet man named Gregory, who I had met maybe twice in 6 years, filed for divorce before she was even sentenced. As for me, I spent the winter enjoying my sunroom. I set up a comfortable couch, some plants, and a small bookshelf. It became my favorite room in the house, a place where I could drink my morning coffee and watch the Arizona sunrise. The new HOA board, led by Richard Clemens, was refreshingly reasonable. They streamlined the architectural review process, making it clearer and more objective. They stopped the petty enforcement of minor violations and focused on things that actually mattered to property values and community safety. In February, Dorothy Chen nominated me to join the board. I initially declined. I had no interest in HOA politics after everything that had happened, but Dorothy was persistent. "We need people who will stand up for what is right," she said. "You did that. The community needs more people like you involved." I eventually agreed to serve a 1-year term. My first meeting as a board member was surreal. We met in the newly renovated clubhouse, in the same room where Patricia had tried to steamroll me just months earlier. But now the conversations were productive. We discussed actual community issues like street lighting and landscape maintenance. No one tried to abuse their power or create fake violations. One evening in April, I was sitting in my sunroom reading when my doorbell rang. It was Tom Bradshaw, the building inspector. "Hey, Tom," I said, surprised. "Is there a problem?" He laughed. "No, nothing like that." I was in the neighborhood doing a final walkthrough on another project, and I wanted to stop by. I heard Patricia took a plea deal. "Yeah, 18 months. Tom shook his head. "You know, in 20 years of doing this job, I have seen a lot of HOA drama. But I have never seen someone go down quite like that, all because she could not leave well enough alone with your sunroom." "I still do not understand why she targeted me," I said. "I never did anything to her." "Some people just need to feel powerful," Tom said. "And when you challenged her authority, even though you were completely in the right, she could not handle it. She had to make an example of you. But she forgot that when you are living in a glass house, you should not throw stones." We talked for a few more minutes, and then Tom left. I went back to my sunroom and sat down with my book, but I could not focus on it. I kept thinking about everything that had happened. It had started so simply. I wanted to add a sunroom to my house. I followed every rule, got every approval, did everything by the book. And Patricia had tried to destroy me for it, not because I had done anything wrong, but because she could not tolerate someone questioning her authority. But in her quest to punish me, she had exposed her own corruption and incompetence. The building inspector she called to shut down my legal addition had instead discovered that the HOA's own clubhouse was a code violation disaster. The lien she filed against me had prompted a lawsuit that uncovered years of financial fraud. Her attempt to make an example of me had made an example of her instead. There was a certain poetic justice to it all. The following week, I received an apology letter from Xavier Vanderhoff, Patricia's soon-to-be ex-husband. He wrote that he had no idea what Patricia had been doing, that he felt terrible about how she had treated me and others in the community, and that he hoped I could forgive him for not seeing it sooner. He was planning to move out of Meadowbrook Springs once the divorce was final. He could not bear the shame and the memories. I felt bad for Gregory. He had seemed like a decent guy, quiet and unassuming, and he had been completely blindsided by his wife's actions. I wrote him back, telling him I bore him no ill will and wished him the best in his fresh start. In May, the HOA held a grand reopening celebration for the clubhouse. It was a potluck dinner with the entire community invited. Over 100 people showed up. The renovated building was beautiful, modern and safe and up to code. We had proper emergency lighting, working fire extinguishers, and a ramp that someone in a wheelchair could actually use without risking their life. Richard Clemens gave a speech thanking everyone for their patience during the renovation and their cooperation with the special assessment. He also thanked me, which was embarrassing but appreciated. Xavier stood up for what was right even when it would have been easier to back down, Richard said. And in doing so, he exposed problems that needed to be fixed. This community is better because of his courage. People applauded and I felt my face turn red. I had never wanted to be the center of attention. I had just wanted to build a sunroom. After the speeches, Dorothy Chen came up to me with a plate of her famous spring rolls. "You know, you did a good thing," she said. "I just wanted Patricia to leave me alone," I said. "Maybe so. But you showed everyone else in this community that the board works for us, not the other way around." Patricia had been running roughshod over people for years, and everyone was too afraid to challenge her. You were not afraid, and look what happened. We have a functional clubhouse now, an honest board, and Patricia is in jail where she belongs. "I guess when you put it that way," I said. Dorothy patted my arm. "Sometimes doing the right thing is messy and difficult, but it is still the right thing." Over the following months, life in Meadowbrook Springs settled into a comfortable rhythm. The new board proved to be competent and fair. Architectural reviews were approved in a timely manner if they met the reasonable standards laid out in the CC and Articus. Fines were only levied for legitimate violations, and even then, homeowners were given warnings and time to correct issues before any penalties were imposed. Several other homeowners took advantage of the fairer system to do renovations they had been putting off for years. One family added a pool. Another converted their garage into a home office. A retired couple built a covered patio. All the projects were approved without drama. I ran into Miguel, my contractor, at a hardware store in June. He had been hired to do 2 of the new renovation projects in Meadowbrook Springs. "Hey, Xavier," he said, grinning. "I should pay you a commission. Ever since your sunroom situation, I have been getting calls from your neighborhood." "Happy to help," I said, laughing. "You know what the funny thing is?" Miguel said. "I have been doing this for 15 years, and that was the first time I ever saw an HOA get in more trouble than the homeowner. Usually it is the other way around." "Patricia made it easy," I said. "She made it karmic," Miguel corrected. "She tried to bury you and buried herself instead." In August, I was working in my yard when a moving truck pulled up to Patricia's old house. Gregory had moved out months ago and the house had been on the market. A young couple, probably in their early 30s, got out of a car behind the truck. I walked over to introduce myself. "Hi, I am Xavier. I live 2 doors down. Welcome to the neighborhood." The man shook my hand. Thanks, I am Jason, and this is my wife Emily. We are excited to be here. It is a good community, I said. And then, because I felt like they deserved to know, I added, you should know the previous owner had some legal trouble. It had nothing to do with the house itself, but it was a big deal in the neighborhood. If anyone mentions Patricia Vanderhoff, that is why. Emily's eyes widened. Oh, we heard about that. Our realtor told us. Something about HOA fraud. Yeah, she embezzled money and approved a bunch of code violations. She went to jail, Jason whistled. Wow, that must have been crazy. It was an interesting few months, I admitted. But the HOA board is completely different now. They are reasonable people. You should not have any problems. That is good to hear, Emily said. We were a little worried about buying into an HOA after hearing that story, but the house was perfect for us. You will be fine, I assured them. Just follow the rules, be a good neighbor, and you will not have any issues. Over the next few weeks, I helped Jason and Emily settle in. I gave them the rundown on trash pickup days, recommended good restaurants in the area, and introduced them to other neighbors. They were nice people, and they fit into the community quickly. In September, my one-year term on the HOA board came to an end. I had fulfilled my obligation to Dorothy Chen and the community, and I was ready to step back. I had never wanted to be involved in HOA politics, and while the experience had been mostly positive under Richard's leadership, I was looking forward to just being a regular homeowner again. At my last board meeting, Richard presented me with a plaque thanking me for my service. It was a nice gesture, even if it felt a bit over the top. You set the standard for what a board member should be, Richard said. Fair, honest, and willing to stand up for the community even when it is not easy. I just showed up to the meetings and tried to be reasonable, I said. Exactly, Richard said. That is all we ever needed. Dorothy Chen replaced me on the board. She had been advocating for various community improvements for years, and now she finally had the authority to make them happen. Within 2 months, she had organized a community garden project and a neighborhood watch program. Both were huge successes. One October evening, almost exactly a year after Patricia had first knocked on my door to complain about my sunroom, I was sitting in that same sunroom watching the sunset. The Arizona sky was painted in brilliant oranges and pinks, and I had a cold beer in my hand. My phone rang. It was Janet Morrison, my lawyer. Xavier, I have some news, she said. Patricia's restitution payments have started coming through. The HOA is distributing them to offset the special assessment costs. You should get a check for about $300 in the next few weeks. That is good news, I said. Not that I was counting on it. There is something else, Janet said. Patricia's husband, Gregory, he settled the divorce. She got almost nothing, just some personal items and a small amount from their savings account. Gregory got the house, the retirement accounts, everything, and he is still planning to sell and move away. I cannot blame him, I said. This neighborhood probably has too many bad memories. Probably, Janet agreed. Anyway, I wanted to close the loop on everything. Your case is officially done. The lien was removed, Patricia paid your legal fees as part of her restitution, and you are completely in the clear. Thanks for everything, Janet. I could not have done this without you. You stood up for yourself, she said. I just made sure you had the legal backing to do it. That is what good neighbors do, they support each other. After we hung up, I sat in my sunroom for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened. A year ago, I had just wanted to add a little extra space to my house, a place to relax and enjoy the Arizona weather. I had never imagined that simple project would expose HOA corruption, lead to arrests, and completely change the dynamics of my neighborhood. But sometimes life works out in unexpected ways. Patricia had tried to use her power to crush me, to make an example of me, to show the entire community that she was in charge and no one could question her. Instead, she had exposed her own corruption. The building inspector she called to shut me down had condemned her clubhouse. The lien she filed against me had led to an investigation that uncovered her embezzlement. Her attempt to destroy me had destroyed her instead. There was a lesson in there somewhere about karma, about how people who abuse power eventually face consequences, about how doing the right thing, even when it is hard, usually pays off in the end. But mostly, I was just glad it was over. I had my sunroom. I had a good relationship with my neighbors. The HOA was functional and fair. Patricia was in jail, and the community was better for it. I took another sip of my beer and watched the last of the sunset fade into twilight. Tomorrow I would go to work, come home, maybe grill some dinner and sit in my sunroom reading a book. It was a simple life, but it was mine, and no one could take it away from me, not even Patricia Vanderhoff. The months continued to pass quietly. Winter came to Gilbert, Arizona, which meant temperatures in the pleasant 70s instead of the brutal hundreds of summer. I spent more and more time in my sunroom, which had become exactly what I had envisioned, a peaceful retreat from the world. In December, the HOA held its annual holiday party. It was the first one in years that did not feel tense or political. Richard Clemens dressed up as Santa Claus and handed out candy canes to the neighborhood kids. Dorothy Chen organized a gift exchange. Someone brought a portable fire pit, and we roasted marshmallows under the Arizona stars. Jason and Emily, the new couple who had bought Patricia's old house, came to the party. Emily was pregnant, due in April, and they were excited about raising their child in Meadowbrook Springs. "This community is so welcoming," Emily told me. "When our realtor mentioned the HOA drama, we were nervous, but everyone has been wonderful." "That is because the problem was one person," I said. "Once she was gone, the community could be what it was supposed to be all along." "Did you ever think about what would have happened if you had just backed down?" Jason asked. "Like if you had torn down your sunroom when she demanded it." I had thought about that, actually. Honestly, I probably would have been miserable. I would have wasted $20,000 and had nothing to show for it. And Patricia would still be president, still be embezzling money, still be abusing her power. Someone else would have eventually challenged her, and the same thing would have happened, just later and to someone else. "So you are glad you fought back?" Emily asked. "I am glad I stood up for myself," I said. "Fighting back makes it sound aggressive. I just refused to be bullied, and I used the legal system the way it is supposed to be used." Everything after that, the inspector finding the clubhouse violations, the investigation uncovering the embezzlement, that was all Patricia's own doing. I just wanted to keep my sunroom. As the holiday party wound down, I looked around at my neighbors laughing and talking and enjoying themselves. This was what a community was supposed to be. Not a dictatorship run by one power-hungry person, but a group of people who treated each other with respect and worked together to maintain a nice place to live. In January, I received a letter from the Arizona Department of Corrections. Patricia Vanderhoff had applied for early release due to good behavior. The HOA, as the victim of her crimes, had the right to submit a statement supporting or opposing her release. Richard called an emergency board meeting to discuss it. The 5 board members, all of whom had been personally affected by Patricia's actions in one way or another, debated for over an hour. Dorothy Chen felt Patricia had not served enough time. 18 months is already a light sentence for stealing $18,000 and all the other things she did. Letting her out early sends the wrong message. Another board member, a man named Frank Lopez, disagreed. She pleaded guilty. She is paying restitution, and her life is already ruined. Her husband divorced her. She lost her house. She will never be able to serve on an HOA board again. How much more punishment does she need? In the end, the board voted 3-2 not to oppose her early release. Richard, Frank, and Susan Park voted in favor of allowing it. Dorothy and the fifth board member, a woman named Lisa Tran, voted against. "I do not think she deserves leniency," Dorothy told me after the meeting. "But I understand the other perspective. She has lost everything. Maybe that is punishment enough." Patricia was released from jail in March after serving 11 months of her 18-month sentence. She moved to Tucson to live with her sister. I heard through the grapevine that she was working at a call center and keeping a low profile. She had been permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona as part of her plea agreement, and her conviction had made her radioactive in the community management world. In a strange way, I felt a little sorry for her. She had destroyed her entire life over petty power plays and relatively small amounts of money. If she had just left me alone, if she had not called the building inspector out of spite, none of this would have happened. She would still be HOA president, still married, still living in her nice house in Gilbert. Her corruption might never have been discovered, but she could not leave well enough alone. She had to punish me for daring to build a sunroom, for daring to question her authority. And that decision had cost her everything. In April, Emily and Jason had their baby, a girl they named Sophia. The neighborhood rallied around them, bringing meals and gifts and offering to babysit when they needed a break. It was the kind of community support that made living in a place like Meadowbrook Springs worthwhile. I stopped by their house one afternoon to drop off a gift, a children's book that had been one of my favorites when I was a kid. Jason answered the door looking exhausted but happy. "Thanks, Xavier," he said, taking the book. "And thanks for everything you did to make this community what it is. Our realtor told us more about what happened. You really stood up to that HOA president and it changed everything." "I just did not want to tear down my sunroom," I said, deflecting. "Maybe that is how it started," Jason said. "But it turned into something bigger. You made this a better place to live. Sophia is going to grow up in a neighborhood where the HOA is not run by a tyrant, and that is partly because you refused to back down." After I left their house, I walked back to my own place slowly, thinking about what Jason had said. I had never set out to be a hero or to change the community. I had just wanted to enjoy my sunroom in peace, but sometimes standing up for yourself has ripple effects you never anticipate. In May, the second anniversary of when I had first submitted my sunroom plans to the architectural committee, I hosted a barbecue at my house. I invited Miguel, my contractor, Tom Bradshaw, the building inspector, Janet Morrison, my lawyer, and several of my neighbors including Richard, Dorothy, Jason, and Emily. We grilled burgers and hot dogs, sat in my sunroom when the afternoon got too hot, and talked about everything except HOA drama. It was a perfect day, the kind of day I had imagined having when I first decided to build the sunroom. As the sun set and my guests started to leave, Tom Bradshaw pulled me aside. "You know, I have been an inspector for 23 years now," he said. "I have seen thousands of construction projects. Most of them are routine, nothing interesting. But every once in a while, I get called to a job that turns into something bigger. Your sunroom was one of those. I came to shut you down because some HOA busybody complained, and I ended up condemning a clubhouse and exposing fraud. That does not happen every day." "I am glad you were thorough," I said. "It is my job," Tom said. "But I will tell you, there are inspectors who would have looked at your place, seen it was fine, and never given that clubhouse a second thought. I almost did not. But something about the way that Patricia woman was acting, so self-righteous and certain, it made me want to dig deeper. And I am glad I did. So am I said. For what it is worth, you saved this community a lot of money in the long run. If that clubhouse had collapsed or caught fire because of all those code violations, people could have died. Tom nodded soberly. That is the part that keeps me up at night. That building was in use for years with all those violations. Emergency exits blocked, electrical problems, structural issues. We got lucky that nothing catastrophic happened. After everyone left, I sat alone in my sunroom one last time that evening. The room was dark, except for the glow of the neighborhood streetlights filtering through the windows. I thought about everything that had happened over the past 2 years, the plans and permits, Patricia's harassment, the building inspector's visit, the condemned clubhouse, the investigation, the arrest, the trial, and finally the return to normalcy. It had been a wild ride, but it was over now. The sunroom was built, Patricia was gone, and the community was thriving. I had learned a lot about standing up for myself, about the importance of documentation and following proper procedures, and about how one person's determination to do the right thing could change an entire community. But more than anything, I had learned that you should never underestimate the power of consequences. Patricia thought she was untouchable, that her position as HOA president gave her the right to do whatever she wanted. She thought she could harass me into tearing down my legally permitted addition, and when I fought back, she thought she could bury me in fines and liens. She was wrong. And when she called the building department to try to shut me down, she set in motion a chain of events that exposed her own wrongdoing. The inspector she summoned to condemn my addition condemned her clubhouse instead. The legal battle she started led to an investigation that uncovered her embezzlement. Her attempt to abuse her power led directly to her losing that power, losing her freedom, and losing everything she had spent years building. There was a certain elegance to it, a poetic justice that felt almost too perfect to be real. But it was real, and I had the sunroom to prove it. I stood up and walked through the French doors back into my living room. Tomorrow I would go to work, come home, and probably spend the evening reading in my sunroom. It was a simple pleasure, but it was mine, hard-won and well-deserved. And somewhere in Tucson, Patricia Vanderhoff was living in her sister's spare bedroom, working at a call center, and probably regretting every decision she had made that led to her downfall. I did not take any satisfaction in her suffering. I was not that kind of person. But I did feel a sense of justice. She had tried to use her power to hurt me, and instead she had hurt only herself. That was how the world was supposed to work. Actions have consequences. Abuse of power leads to accountability, and sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys win. I turned off the lights and headed to bed, comfortable in the knowledge that my sunroom was built to code, properly permitted, and completely legal. And nothing, not Patricia Vanderhoff or anyone else, could ever take that away from me. The story of my sunroom and Patricia's downfall became something of a legend in Gilbert. When I would mention where I lived, people would sometimes say, "Wait, is not that the neighborhood where the HOA president went to jail?" And I would nod and give them the short version of the story, always careful to emphasize that I had just followed the rules and stood up for myself. In June, I was approached by a local news station that wanted to do a story about HOA overreach. They had heard about what happened in Meadowbrook Springs and wanted to interview me. I declined. I had never wanted publicity, and the situation was resolved. There was no point in rehashing it for the cameras. But the reporter persisted, explaining that HOA abuse was a widespread problem, and that sharing my story could help other homeowners who were facing similar situations. Eventually, I agreed to a brief interview, with the condition that they focus on the lessons learned rather than the drama. The segment aired in July. It was only 4 minutes long, but it covered the basics: my legal addition, Patricia's harassment, the building inspector condemning the clubhouse, and the eventual discovery of embezzlement. The reporter framed it as a cautionary tale about unchecked HOA authority and the importance of homeowners knowing their rights. After the segment aired, I received dozens of emails and phone calls from people across Arizona who were dealing with their own HOA nightmares. A man in Scottsdale, whose HOA was trying to fine him for painting his door the wrong shade of beige. A woman in Temp, whose architectural committee had rejected her solar panel installation, despite it being protected by state law. A retiree in Mesa, whose HOA had placed a lien on his house over a dispute about his lawn height. I did my best to help them. I gave them Janet Morrison's contact information. I told them to document everything, to never communicate with the HOA except in writing, and to stand firm if they were in the right. And I reminded them that HOAs are not above the law, that board members can be held accountable, and that sometimes fighting back is worth it. Over the next few months, I heard back from several of the people I had helped. The man in Scottsdale successfully challenged his fine and got the HOA's color restrictions overturned as too vague. The woman in Temp installed her solar panels and sued the HOA for violating state law, winning a settlement that covered her legal fees and then some. The retiree in Mesa got his lien removed and discovered that his HOA board had been mismanaging funds, leading to an investigation similar to what had happened in my neighborhood. It felt good to know that my experience was helping others. Patricia's attempt to punish me had not only exposed her own corruption, but had also inadvertently created a roadmap for other homeowners to fight back against abusive HOAs. In September, I received a letter from Patricia. It was forwarded to me by the HOA since she did not have my personal address. The envelope had a Tucson postmark. I almost threw it away without opening it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a single handwritten page. "Xavier," it began. "You do not owe me anything, and I do not expect forgiveness. I am writing this letter because my therapist suggested it might help me take accountability for my actions. I know that everything that happened was my fault. I let power go to my head. I convinced myself that I was protecting the community, that I was maintaining standards, when really I was just being a bully. When you challenged me on your sunroom, I could not handle it. I saw it as a threat to my authority rather than a homeowner exercising his legal rights. I called the building inspector to punish you, and it backfired spectacularly. I lost everything: my position, my marriage, my freedom, and my reputation. But the worst part is knowing that I brought it all on myself. The clubhouse violations, the embezzlement, all of it was eventually going to come out. You did not expose me. I exposed myself by abusing my power and breaking the law. For what it is worth, I am sorry for how I treated you. You were just trying to improve your home, and I made your life hell for no good reason. I hope you are enjoying your sunroom. Sincerely, Patricia Vanderhoff. I read the letter twice, then folded it and put it back in the envelope. I did not know how to feel about it. Part of me appreciated the apology, but another part of me thought it was too little, too late. Patricia had put me through months of stress, cost me thousands in legal fees, even though I had been reimbursed, and tried to damage my property value and reputation. A single letter did not erase that. But holding on to anger did not help anyone either. I decided to take the apology at face value, acknowledge that Patricia seemed to be taking some responsibility for her actions, and then move on with my life. I did not write back. In October, Richard Clemens announced he was stepping down as HOA president. His job was transferring him to California, and he would be moving in November. Dorothy Chen was elected as the new president, and she immediately set about implementing the community improvement projects she had been planning. Under Dorothy's leadership, Meadowbrook Springs continued to thrive. She was everything Patricia had not been: transparent, fair, and genuinely interested in making the community better rather than wielding power over it. Monthly board meetings were well attended and productive. Architectural reviews were handled promptly and fairly. And perhaps most importantly, homeowners felt like they had a voice. In November, I finally took down the folder of documents related to my sunroom saga. The permits, the approval letters, the survey, the emails with Patricia, the legal correspondence, all of it went into a box in my garage. I did not need it anymore. The battle was over and I had won. That Thanksgiving, I hosted dinner at my house for the first time. My parents drove down from Flagstaff, and I invited a few neighbors including Dorothy, Jason, Emily, and baby Sophia. We ate turkey and stuffing in my dining room, then moved to the sunroom for dessert. My mother pulled me aside as we were clearing dishes. "I am proud of you," she said. "When you first told me about the HOA situation, I was worried you were getting in over your head, but you handled it perfectly. You stood up for yourself without being vindictive, and you made your community better in the process." "I just did not want to tear down my sunroom," I said, echoing the same thing I had told everyone else. My mother smiled. "Maybe that is true, but you also could have given up when it got hard. You could have paid Patricia's fake fines just to make her go away. You could have torn down the addition and moved to a different neighborhood. But you did not. You fought for what was right, and that takes courage." Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and I was alone in my sunroom, I thought about what my mother had said. She was right that I could have given up at any point. Patricia had counted on that. She had figured that I would not want the hassle of fighting her, that I would fold rather than deal with lawyers and lawsuits and HOA drama. But I had not folded, and that had made all the difference. Not just for me, but for everyone in Meadowbrook Springs. By standing up to Patricia, I had exposed her corruption and created an opportunity for real change in the community. The new board was fair and effective. The clubhouse was safe and up to code. Homeowners felt empowered rather than bullied, all because I refused to tear down my sunroom. As I sat there in the dark, looking out at the quiet neighborhood street, I realized that this was the ending I had wanted all along. Not Patricia's arrest or her punishment, though those had been necessary consequences of her actions. What I had really wanted was peace. The ability to enjoy my home without harassment. The freedom to make improvements without dealing with petty tyrants. A community where the rules were fair and applied equally to everyone. And I had that now. My sunroom stood as a monument to the idea that ordinary people could stand up to bullies and win, that following the rules and doing the right thing still mattered, and that karma, while sometimes slow, was ultimately inevitable. Patricia Vanderhoff had tried to tear down my sunroom and had torn down her own life instead. The building inspector she summoned to condemn my legal addition had condemned her illegal clubhouse. The power she abused had been stripped away, and the community she claimed to be protecting was better off without her. It was not the story I had expected when I first decided to add a sunroom to my house. But it was the story I got, and I would not change a thing about how it ended. Because in the end, the good guys did win, justice was served, and I got to keep my sunroom. And really, That was all I had ever wanted.